welcome to Driving Force Radio, where we seek to discover what drives today's leaders. My co-host today is Steve McMillan, the public policy editor at the Denver Post. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thanks, Jan. Good to be here.
And you know, as always, you bring some of the most compelling stories to Driving Force Radio, and today is no different. Tell us what we're talking about today.
We're going to talk a little bit about the foreclosure crisis, which really wrapped itself around Colorado back in 2006, and it looks like we're starting to come out of it, but there still are a lot of issues, public policy issues, that are being dealt with in the legislature and also could be dealt with this election season. So we wanted to talk about those.
I love this idea. And our first guests today are Ryan McMacken, the Communications Director and the Economist at Colorado's Division of Housing. He's been there for 8 years. He created the Division of Housing's Economics blog, which features regular updates on economic trends and statistics. And he has also served as the economics spokesman for the Division of Housing and has been quoted in several national and local publications. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Great to be here.
Our next guest is Cheryl Hoffman, the CEO of Brownfields Capital and EcoMax Holdings. She developed and patented an innovative transactional process that creates a financial instrument for financing the cleanup and full redevelopment of brownfield and other previously used sites. She has over 30 years of capital markets, public accounting, and finance experience. She's published articles and served as a guest lecturer in numerous publications and at various very highly regarded organizations. Welcome to the show, Cheryl.
Thank you very much.
Okay, hey Ryan, I wanted to check in with you first. We all know that the hyperinflated mortgage market was a key instigator in the economic meltdown in the fall of 2008. And that turned into the Great Recession. Could you explain to us how the housing market got so superheated?
Well, there is no one agreed upon theory, so any explanation I'm going to give is certainly going to have its dissenters. But there's a variety of explanations that you could use. Generally, the two competing theories here are that housing became really out of control, and too much money was being put into housing as a result of a lack of sufficient regulation. Now, on the other side, however, there have been a number of arguments claiming that really the bubble was pushed up by excessive monetary ease, and that was one of the driving factors. So it depends on where you place the blame. But we could look at some of the facts of the situation that took place over time. And we do see that following the dot-com bust in 2001, and to a lesser extent in 2002, that the federal government sought to deal with that immediately by engaging in a variety of stimulus programs, that they weren't going to just let that recession play itself out. So the administration at the time began to engage in monetary easing as well as in a variety of fiscal spending and fiscal stimulus programs. And so this immediately began to feed into what later became the housing bubble. And so a lot of money was going into that, and not just because of monetary easing, but because of tax policies related to, say, the mortgage interest tax deduction, as well as the innovation and increasing importance of certain tools related to housing, like mortgage-backed securities, which had been around since the late 60s and had started to accelerate a little bit in the 80s, but became far more prevalent in the 90s and then over the last decade. And so those became much more common. And a lot of other factors that really lessened the transaction costs of engaging in a lot of lending for residential real estate, like MERS, for example, which was this electronic system of dealing with mortgages and getting more mortgages passed through the system as quickly as possible. And on top of that, you just had a lot of incentive to really do as much lending as possible because of the low interest rates, because of so much money being available, so much liquidity being available in the overall economy as a result of this original dealing with that dot-com bust several years earlier. And so we can see really that by 2006, if we look at new home construction, for example, we started to hit a plateau really even as early as 2005 when we look at the number of excess homes that went unsold at the end of the month during that period. And we also then by 2007 started to see home prices start to level out. So over that period, because of typical boom-bust factors that different economists will blame on different things, you had a frenzy of home buying, but not just that. People generally felt that they were going to be earning much larger incomes as time went on, and a lot of loans were being made and applied for along those assumptions that, well, I should get the maximum mortgage I can afford. It's 2005. I just assume I'll be making a lot more money in 2008 than I'm making now. And so, so much activity geared toward buying and buying as much as you could because that monetary easing, coupled with so many policies that benefited people who got into home ownership, really created additional factors where they just assumed that this would continue to be a good move and even an investment over time. And we started to hear all of those things as those economic factors began to permeate the larger culture, when all those ads were telling people that you're throwing your money away on rent, you should never rent, you should buy, and home prices always go up. And you just had this overall cultural shift where everybody decided that home ownership had somehow become synonymous with the American dream, and that everyone should get as engaged into it as possible.
You know, you mentioned mortgage-backed securities. Yeah. Could you explain what part they played in sort of the mortgage crisis?
Well, there were a couple of ways that you could point to and say that this complicated the issue, and also create an additional incentive to make as many mortgages as possible. One reason being is that after the innovations behind mortgage-backed securities became much more popular, and as they became more common, it became less and less prevalent where you had the actual lending institutions maintaining those mortgages in their portfolios. So you had something of a disconnect then between the lenders who were making the loans or the organization that was originating the loans. The mortgage loan originator sometimes were independent agents and so on. Lots of loans were being originated, but they weren't necessarily then going into the loan servicers, that is those people you actually pay your mortgage payment to, wasn't necessarily going into their portfolio. So there was less of an incentive to keep as close an eye on those. And if they started to get into trouble, the owner, it was much more difficult to go out and check on the loan and see what was going to happen there, because those loans were then being repackaged as mortgage-backed securities and sold off into various places around the world. And in 2008, after the crisis took place, someone started passing around the internet this amusing slideshow composed of stick figures, who then discussed what's this whole mortgage-backed security thing, and how is this an important factor. And it became kind of the stereotypical owner then of these mortgage-backed securities became the Norwegian fishing village. The slideshow talked about how, well, we're going to repackage these loans, and we're going to put them into different tranches with different kinds of risk, and we're going to get them out there, and lots of different people are going to buy them. So there's going to be a total difference now between who you pay your mortgage payment to and who actually owns your mortgage. And so, yes, you're paying monthly to Wells Fargo or whomever, but really the owner of those mortgages, and just a piece of that, is owned by this Norwegian fishing village, which has invested into a retirement fund. And part of that are these mortgage-backed securities they've purchased. And so you can see then how ownership being different from the servicers, being different from the loan originators, could have contributed to some issues there.
Well,
Absolutely. Go ahead.
It's a basic premise to lending that the lender should want the least amount of risk.
Right.
And when you separate the ownership from the risk, you then have the incentive for the lender to be solely about making the upfront fee prior to it being sold. And I believe it was the disconnect between the two.
Absolutely.
So I think that was the biggest part.
Ryan, I want to come back to something that you had said earlier, in 2006, Colorado really led the nation in the number of foreclosures, but you saw Florida, Nevada, and California sort of lap us over time. What happened? How did this all happen with these subprime mortgages and things?
Well, if you want to look at the origins of the actual crisis, then we already discussed how the bubble kind of got
Right.
started. But how did the crisis get going? Again, that comes back to whether you subscribe to the there wasn't enough liquidity theory, which is generally backed by, say, Paul Krugman and Ben Bernanke, who feel that there's not enough liquidity in the economy. It's creating too much reluctance to spend and loan and so on. So we need to add more liquidity there. Or you can subscribe to the idea that it was a confidence crisis, like that pushed by John Taylor at Stanford, who notes that there was enough liquidity. It's that people started to realize at some point in 2007, maybe even earlier, that the wages and the real economic growth wasn't keeping up with the prices of real estate and other goods and services that were also seeing big price increases during this period. And so when people started to get a sense of the fact that I'm into this mortgage for all of this money, and wages aren't keeping up, so there's no new buyers to come in and buy it from me if I wish to sell, or in my specific case, I'm not getting the wage increases I thought I would, and I've had another kid in the meantime, and I'm not going to be able to make these payments. I'm starting to get real worried about it. People then start to think about defaulting, or they do run into problems with defaulting. And then, of course, the lenders, or the people who own the mortgages, they start to get real concerned because they realize that the larger wealth in the economy isn't keeping up with the increases and the obligations related to these mortgage loans. And so, according to Taylor, at least, that's what then triggers the event where it all comes crashing down, because people realize that they're simply not going to be able to make good on these loans, and their values then crash. So you have yourself then a financial crisis. And a question I often get, though, is why was there more defaulting in Colorado early on,
Right.
before Lehman Brothers in 2008 and all of that? Why did we start to see that in 2006? And really, you could go back to 2004 when you started to see some significant growth in foreclosures there. And I've never seen that question scientifically answered with any huge reports or sophisticated theories. The best we have, I think, is to look back at this period and see how was Colorado different from most of the country during this time. And I don't think it was Colorado had more high-risk loans being originated or anything like that. I haven't seen any evidence along those lines. But what we do know about that period is that the recovery period between 2003 and 2007 in Colorado was weaker than it was in most of the country. If we look at the GDP growth nationally compared to GDP growth in Colorado, it didn't do all that well here. We had a pretty good 1990s, but job growth is pretty anemic, really, following the 2002 recession, because our recession was a little bit later in 2002. We finally get back on our feet in 2003, but we never had unemployment rates get down really low during that period. You didn't have solid wage and job growth during that time. And so it could have been then that we started to encounter those confidence issues earlier than the rest of the country, because we never really got onto as solid footing as many metro areas did, or as many states did during that period. You can still remember, say in 2005, 2006, people leaving the state to go get jobs elsewhere,
Right.
simply because it just wasn't that strong here.
Right.
Cheryl, your home was foreclosed on in 2010. Can you tell us what happened?
It was 2011, actually, and there's a lot of issues about my personal situation that I can't discuss. I'd love to, but it would take the entire hour, and I don't want to take the entire hour. What I do want to focus on is what I learned from having to research what actually had happened to my loan, and trying to get face-to-face with somebody who could discuss with me what to do about the problem that I'd encountered on my loan. And what I learned was what led me to want to work with Corrine on this very important initiative. Essentially, what I found out from my research on my own personal issue was that in Colorado, we have a system that doesn't require the lender to produce the original note or a certified copy of the note to foreclose on your house. So a simple analogy for me is when somebody forecloses on or control of your automobile because you didn't make payments, they have to produce the title.
Right.
If they didn't produce the title, but a lawyer said, I once saw the title, that would allow the bank to take your car, sell it to somebody else, and when you showed up later with the title, they would say, oh, I'm sorry, it's too late. It's gone. And I think most people can understand that that's not a workable system. And essentially, that's what we have in our mortgage laws in Colorado. In addition to that, I spoke back east to some former executives with some large financial institutions who helped guide me through my research. One of them was a former senior executive at GMAC Commercial Mortgage. And he said, you know, I remember, Cheryl, that we questioned whether or not to do business in Colorado years ago because you have some funny laws out there. I think you need to look into them. So when I got interested in the whole issue and really started digging, I do see an economic problem if people don't feel comfortable buying real estate here and being able to control property rights and title issues and so on. It certainly trickles down. And so I want to talk about that part of it. What happened with me personally was my loan was sold 5 times to over the course of 5 years, 2 different servicers. I've written to 21 different parties, including the law firms locally here that helped Bank of America ultimately foreclose on my house. And I would never received a face-to-face meeting. I never received a phone call back from a person who would give me a return phone number. I've never seen a single page out of my loan file. And finally, my highly qualified people back east that helped me suggested I file a lawsuit against B of A to force them to produce this documentation. When I did that, I discovered that there were in fact 2 loans, 2 loan documents and 2 different deeds of trust. And at no point in time did the 2 ever match. And it also appeared that some of the pages of the note had been altered. So without just a basic sort of system that allows you due process so that you can get the documentation you need as a responsible, I had a credit score in the top 5% of all people nationally. I worked on that since I graduated from college at CSU, and it was perfect. I was an expensive home. I'm a responsible business owner. I've lived here my whole life. I don't default on my obligations.
Well, and
I couldn't find anyone to talk to. I couldn't find who owned my loan. I don't know who actually collected from me or where the money went. And that's just, to me, not a workable system. So when Corrine, brought this initiative and Beth McCann brought the House bill, I thought, that's an important thing.
Absolutely.
That's really basic to a system.
We'll be talking about the House bill in a second, but you are a respected businesswoman. You have lots of business savvy. You understand the finance markets and the real estate markets. And if something like this could happen to you, who gets the markets and are part of them, what are people out there with less business savvy up against? I mean, this sounds like this is a really uphill climb.
It really opened my eyes. And I would be a person who would typically be on the banker side of most issues. That's my industry. I'm not on this one. There's just some really fundamental basic things that are not there for consumers. In the secondary mortgage market, when someone buys my mortgage, the first buyer of my mortgage was Thornburg Mortgage. When they sold it again to a mortgage securitization trust in Chicago that was being managed by LaSalle Bank, I got the SEC documents. And what is required for, even in the secondary market, for one bank to sell to another, or one trust to sell to another or to an investor, is far in excess of what this bill is asking for. So those are documents that are basically required in almost every other state and in every securitization transaction anyway. So nobody's asking for the bankers to do anything extra in this bill. And I think we are one of the only states, if not the only state, that doesn't require someone to produce the original note or a certified copy of the original note. And that's real important.
You decided to testify in front of the Legislative Committee on behalf of House Bill 1156, I believe.
I did.
That would have changed foreclosure laws. Tell us why you decided to do that, and then what happened.
Well, I think I touched on why I think it's so important. And what I learned was, without due process, there are countless issues that can happen between the consumer, the borrower, and the lender that have that could be worked out if everybody had equal access to the information and the paperwork, and that's just basic. So I think it's a really important issue. I've never testified. I'd actually, even though I grew up here, never been in the state capitol building, so I did have my eyes open. We were each given 6 minutes to testify. There were 13 of us homeowners with a wide variety of issues that had happened through our foreclosures that were nothing to do with, gee, I just was stupid and overborrowed and overextended myself and they came and took my house because I wasn't paying. There, of the 13 of us, there was no one that was really in that predicament, but all of us had a story about why this basic due process is important. And we each spoke for 6 minutes. Most of the committee members went in and out. Very few of them sat and listened to everybody's stories. They were referred to as sob stories, which of course they're not. You know, I'm not a victim type. You know, it wasn't a sob story. I thought it was an important issue. And it was very clear to me that the die was cast prior to any of the testimony being heard. And it was my first experience with that sort of legislative testimony process. And I saw how it had become so politicized. And again, that made me even more anxious to speak because I would typically be almost on every issue on the side of most bankers. I understand the industry. There's no way that I believe that this initiative adds any sort of burden to a lender. It requires them to be accountable to do what they're already supposed to do by law. That's all. So if they are doing what the law already asked them to do, it shouldn't add any cost that I can see. And I never really got that answer. I asked that question and didn't get an answer.
Never gotten an answer. Ryan, I want to come back to you. You know, here we are in 2012. Is the mortgage crisis over? If yes, yay. But if not, when do you see it's going to be over?
Well, the mortgage crisis may be over. That doesn't mean the economic ills are over. I think if we look around and look at home prices, delinquency rates, those sorts of things, those have largely moderated, seem to be coming down, certainly from their 2009 peaks. And a lot of that is due to the fact that people continue to form households, they need to buy houses, and there's been very little new house production in the last few years. And in fact, people are trying to get caught up now with multifamily and rental housing, because that's where the real need is now, which also is interestingly one of the other outcomes of putting so much emphasis on single family for so many years, is multifamily wasn't produced during that time, so now renters don't have that stock to take advantage of. But the issues around employment and debt, and not necessarily mortgage debt at all, will continue for several years. And the housing crisis was a part of that larger issue. I don't think I would say that the housing crisis caused the recession any more than, say, the stock market crash in 1929 caused the Depression. I mean, it was a related issue for sure. So there are a lot of debt and employment issues that need to be dealt with. And I don't think those are going to go away in the near term, because we've got so many debt issues to deal with. So many loans, so much really austerity that needs to be done. If you think about that, student loan debt, for example, recently passed the $1 trillion mark. That's a significant drag on the economy, because you've got a lot of people unable to spend or invest those monies that now have to go into student loans. And so people are going to need to scale back and deal with that sort of debt. And not just real estate debt, although a lot of it will continue to be real estate debt, because you will have a substantial number of people still who may, while they can make their mortgage payments, may still be in a position where they may not be able to sell it as much as for they owe, at least in the short term. And so all of those issues, I think, will continue certainly for the next couple of years.
Gotcha. Ryan, thank you so much for being with us in this segment. Cheryl, thank you so much for being with us in this segment and for sharing your insights on this. I mean, I think a lot of people, as you said, see it as a sob story, and it really isn't. That there really are stories that go behind each one of these things, and I thank you for being here and sharing that story with our listeners. And Steve, thank you so much.
Sure.
Well, when we come back to Driving Force Radio, we'll be talking to Corrine Fowler and Don Childears, and we'll be talking about the debate over Initiative 84, which is really looking at how to change Colorado's foreclosure laws and sort of close some of these gaps that are out there for the borrower and make it a little more efficient. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Driving Force Radio, where we seek to discover what drives today's leaders. My co-host today is Steve McMillan, the public policy editor at the Denver Post. And Steve, we've been talking about the mortgage crisis that's been going on here in Colorado and really has implications nationally. But we're going to move on to this conversation because there's really a debate going on here in Colorado around Initiative 84, which is really arguing to change Colorado's foreclosure laws. And I think this is going to be an interesting progression to the conversation we just ended.
Certainly is. There was a proposal in the legislative session to enact some changes to foreclosure laws that did not pass. They died in a House committee. The result was the Colorado Progressive Coalition and Corrine are pushing Initiative 84 to take it to the ballot. It'll be an amendment, a constitutional amendment, if they can get enough signatures and get it passed. So it'll be an interesting summer.
Absolutely. And as you said, Steve, our guests are Corrine Fowler, the Economic Justice Director for the Colorado Progressive Coalition. She's a seventh generation Coloradan and has studied and experienced the economic transformations that Colorado's undergone in recent decades. Our next guest is Don Childears, the president of the Colorado Bankers Association. He has served at CBA since 1975 and frequently speaks on NBC Nightly News and ABA's annual convention. Welcome to the show, Don.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Corrine, I want to just start with you. Tell us a little bit about the Colorado Progressive Coalition and who it represents and what you're doing.
Sure. The Economic Justice Campaign at the Colorado Progressive Coalition, which is just one of our projects, focuses in on low-income communities of color. We do our work through grassroots community organizing and public policy advocacy. So we identify our priorities by speaking to our members. We have about 36,000 members all across the state. We have 3 offices, one in Greeley, one in Denver, and one in Pueblo, and we've been in Colorado since for about 16 years. So we identify our priorities by speaking with our members, and then we try to, find policy solutions that'll help them.
Okay.
Don, can you tell us a little bit about the Colorado Bankers Association, who you represent, and
Sure.
what you do?
Yeah, we've been around for over a century. We represent the commercial banks in the state and have over 90% of the assets, offices, and employees in those banks. We don't represent other kinds of lenders, from credit unions to mortgage companies, etc. We happen to be a fairly proactive organization, have a national reputation for doing innovative things, like we recently launched an initiative to provide more credit to small businesses and created this unique website, smallbizlending.org, that's now becoming quite a national phenomenon. But that's the nature of the association. We provide a variety of services to banks throughout the state, but government relations is high on that list.
Well, and Corrine, I want to talk about some of these government things that the Progressive Coalition is doing. And I know that you guys are pushing for a constitutional amendment known as Initiative 84, which really calls for a change in the way the foreclosure process works here in Colorado. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It does. We started doing organizing a couple of summers ago in some of the hardest hit neighborhoods around for foreclosure in Colorado. We actually didn't know that foreclosure was such a major issue until we started talking to the community, and it just kept coming up again and again. So over about an 18-month period, we collected stories, we did our research, we talked to our national campaign partners and identified 2 pieces of legislation actually that we ran this last legislative session. One was House Bill 1156. And House Bill 1156 doesn't actually address the foreclosure crisis. process, the economic issues that we know about that Ryan was discussing in such detail. It's actually not going to halt foreclosures or, help the people who took out subprime loans or who had predatory lending issues or who need loan modifications. So it's not, even attempting to address all of those things. We actually found that there was this law in Colorado that was passed in 2006 that allows for a lender to foreclose on a home with just a statement from their attorney allowing them to do so. So basically, they don't have to provide any evidence that they own the debt at any time during the foreclosure process. And we had no idea what a huge issue this was. The outpouring from the community, from folks that had had this issue and undergone foreclosure and had their home taken wrongfully, sometimes fraudulently, was just tremendous. And so we pushed House Bill 1156, and we were very surprised with the committee hearing outcome. We thought that at least we would see it make it to the floor for a full debate. To see it die at such an early stage in the process was very disappointing. And to see the legislators, the way that they acted during the hearing, they were really not present for most of the hearing, and we felt as if the issue wasn't heard, that people were not heard that day. We certainly never planned on running this ballot initiative. That it wasn't on our agenda. Actually, the community brought it to us. Immediately following the hearing, we were approached by some of those that had testified, Stephen Brunette specifically, who is the proponent on the initiative, and they said, we were not listened to today. The people were not heard. The people are not protected. They do not have due process in this state, and they need to. And so the initiative language was drafted, and we were asked to be the other proponent. I was asked to be the other proponent, and we are going forward with it. And we feel very strongly that, the people of Colorado deserve their property rights to be protected, and that there's a hole in our system right now, and the due process is not being followed, and it's just right here in this one place in our foreclosure system. And it's the only time that you can bring a civil suit to court without providing evidence that you have the right to do so. And it's just such an interesting thing that they were, able to pass this law in 2006, creating this hole. So we would just like to turn it back to that, and we think that's a pretty rational ask.
Don, let's bring you in. Do the foreclosure laws in Colorado need to be changed, and is Initiative 84 the way to go about doing it?
Maybe yes and no. The foreclosure laws in this state probably could take a little bit of tweaking, but by and large I think they're realistic, and they do provide due process for both sides of the transaction of foreclosure. And regretfully, we have too much of that to deal with today. And we recognize people go through a lot of pain, and quite often when there's a foreclosure, there's a health issue, a job loss, domestic issue, or something like that behind that caused the financial crisis. But nonetheless, we think that the laws are good. I have to disagree with Corrine. We absolutely must provide documentation now. And we have options. We can provide the original evidence of debt, which is problematic, and I'd be glad to explain that if you want. We can provide certified copies, but we absolutely must provide a copy. And the attorney can sign a statement saying that that is a good and valid evidence of that debt that is owed. And we do absolutely produce the documentation, and the consumer, the homeowner, the borrower, has a right to challenge that. And they can go into a Rule 120 hearing and contest that and say, no, that is not right. But the system works well now. We don't know of any lenders or lawyers for lenders who think that we can foreclose on someone without documentation. The Attorney General's office doesn't think that we can do that. They say they've investigated hundreds of complaints and have literally never seen one where the wrong party foreclosed, or that the party being foreclosed upon didn't owe the money and was in default on it. And so we think it works well. We've got Supreme Court decisions that back up the right of the borrower to request in a Rule 120 hearing evidence that they owe the debt. So, and this is all supervised by a public trustee system where Colorado's unique in the country. I think we have the best model in the country. We're the only state where actual independent, objective public officials oversee the process. In all other states, you either do it through the courts, where you can have proceedings on the same property going on in 2 or 3 courts at once, which really leads to chaos, or you have private trustees where the lender says, you know, I want Steve to be the trustee on this. I think ours is perfect because it makes a public official the trustee that is either elected or appointed by the governor. They have set standards to carry out that protect the consumer, establish very specific due process for both parties. You know, because I won't say it's tilted in our favor, it's not tilted in their favor. It's a good methodical process that works well.
Don't the Rule 120 hearings have some pretty stringent restrictions on the kind of questions and access to the judge
They do in the
or a homeowner
statute,
would have?
but the key thing is the 2 Supreme Court cases, one in 1989, one in 1998, that absolutely says the debtor has the right to challenge the validity of those documents, kind of period. It's just about that carte blanche. And we always presume that they have that authority so that the banks anyway, and I think most lenders, are well prepared to say, this is the evidence of debt, this is what is owed, this is what has been received, this is what is delinquent, this is why we're exercising our right to foreclose.
I'd like to respond to some of those statements. In the Rule 120, there are 2 questions that are in statute that the judge is supposed to ask and that the judge generally asks. Are you in default or are you in the military? There is no other point in that hearing where the borrower actually has the right or the opportunity to challenge that. What happens is the borrower, if they want to challenge, is going through years and years of litigation. We have homeowners that have spent 4 years and $40,000 challenging the rightful owner of their home, and sometimes winning their cases. Stephen Brunette, who is the proponent, represents these homeowners, and that's why he's bringing this forward. To make a blanket statement saying that all banks are providing all the documents when they don't have to. They only need to have a statement from their attorney stating that they have the right to foreclose. And we have lawyers who have worked for foreclosing firms who testified at the hearing at House Bill 1156 that said, I simply processed foreclosures and checkmarked the certification and never saw any documents. I received an email from the bank saying, please foreclose on X, and I foreclosed on the owner. So there, to make a blanket statement saying, yes, we're always providing all of these documents. I'm not saying that every bank is a bad actor, or every lender is not following what they should be following, but since they don't have to, and it's in our statute saying that they don't have to, they are simply processing foreclosures quickly. Also, the trustees, the public trustees, are supposed to be a neutral party. They're supposed to protect or work for the homeowner and the lender and help them through the foreclosure process, be a kind of a guide for that. There have been many ethical violations that have been raised about the interested parties that are funding the public trustees associations, one being foreclosure lawyers who profit off of processing the foreclosures quickly, and who also wrote the 2006 legislation, or actually helped to make the 2000 legislation legal. So there's a lot of violations occurring and not a lot of protections for the homeowner at all.
I'm afraid we just have a factual disagreement there, because the Rule 20 hearing does in statute provide those 2 things that Corrine referenced, but the Supreme Court decisions interpreting that absolutely say that the borrower has the right to confront that evidence and challenge it. On top of that, I'm still waiting to hear of any case where in Colorado the borrower or the lender foreclosed without the proper documentation. There are occasional allegations, but there's not a single court case out of 20,000 foreclosures a year.
So you've never seen a foreclosure go through that shouldn't have?
We have not.
Well,
the Attorney General's office.
I can provide you
the Attorney
with.
General. No, I
here's
mean
a
court
whole
cases,
bunch of
not
them.
allegations, but court
No, I have a
cases.
court case right here. Randy Golditch. Here's his court case. He was foreclosed upon wrongfully, was never late.
And what was the
ever,
decision of
ever.
that?
He got his home back. He spent $40,000, and the party that bought his home at his foreclosure auction had to lost it. You know, they had to buy it back. The foreclosing bank had to buy it back from the other party, and he got his home back in the end. So we do have court cases. There's a New York Times article right now of someone who purchased their home for cash. Stephen Brunette actually represented them, paid cash, and got foreclosed upon. And that case is going through the Supreme Court right now. There are plenty of documented cases that have occurred. And we have stories. I got 7 calls in one day this week from people who are trying to challenge this. We have people all over the state, from Pagosa Springs to Eagle County to Colorado Springs, calling us because this is so rampant. This is happening. This law is creating this loophole, and it's not protecting our homeowners.
Don, Corrine is saying that there are lawyers out there who are actually robo-signing. They are signing documents saying that the banks have title to these properties and the right to foreclose, and they've never seen these documents. How do you respond to that?
Other than the one witness that she provided who basically said that he had been doing that, which if I was I am a lawyer, but if I was signing something like that, I sure wouldn't want to be in the position of signing a false statement, submitting it to the court, and be subject to disciplinary action for perjuring myself. That's effectively what happened in this case. But we know of no other cases where that has happened. The fact is, the banks that I work for document this stuff. They're not about to go through the expense of doing this when they don't like going through the process to begin with. They don't want to go halfway and then have to back up. They don't want the bad publicity that would result from this. But there are no court cases.
So if they're already doing it, then why would this constitutional amendment be so problematic? If banks are if they already have the documents and they're already providing them, and for us to just say that should be the law, then it should be no problem to pass this.
It's very simple, because you have written it the wrong way. It basically says that we have to record those documents, which is the first time in the United States that I know of that you would have such a thing. And that basically amounts to requiring in the Constitution something that the secondary market prohibits. And Ryan, I think, did a good explanation in the previous section explaining the secondary market. But the fact is, if you don't have it operating, the lending you can do drops to about 10% of the current level, because 90% of all mortgages in Colorado are sold in the secondary market. And they say, no, we're not going to buy anything that requires recording of these assignments and transfers and endorsements. And if that's required constitutionally by the use of one word that they put in there, then we're not going to do that. That means that when a bank lends Steve money for a mortgage, if that's all the money we have, that's the extent of the lending. What we do now is turn around and sell it on the secondary market, get money back, we then can lend to Corrine. We sell that loan, get money back, we lend that to someone else. So that's why it's so important. And the constitutional amendment, by the wording of it, basically requires something that the buyers on the secondary market, specifically Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the government's own entities, absolutely prohibit.
I think
so that's
that
what's
Ryan,
hanging it up, is
but
that
Ryan
one
also
word.
made
There's a little more than
mention
that, but that's
multiple
the key
times.
point.
Ryan multiple times pointed out to the fact that it was the secondary market and this incentive to sell more and more mortgages and move money around at such large rates that actually caused the foreclosure crisis to begin with. I'm not saying, making an opinion about the secondary market. I actually don't understand it well enough, and I'm not going to pretend to do so. But we know that all of this gambling and selling off of all of these loans is one of the main issues that caused the foreclosure crash to begin with.
I do have to take a little bit of exception to the use of the word gambling in regard to this. Banks are highly regulated. When the Dodd-Frank Act went through the U.S. Congress, putting in place a number of reforms, that primarily was aimed at the non-bank actors who weren't regulated. In fact, Barney Frank, whose name is in the Dodd-Frank Act, says the banks were the good guys in this. They did good loan underwriting, they had good processes, They understood it. That doesn't mean 100% of them are right, but in general, they've done a good job. It's those non-bank mortgage lenders that were the bad actors that they're trying to deal with. And so I really do take exception when we're accused of gambling with people's money.
Corinne, I have a quick question. The people that the lenders are foreclosing on, they're not paying their mortgage. Why shouldn't they be foreclosed on? They borrowed the money. I mean, if I borrow money, I have to pay the money back.
And again, I'm going to go back to Initiative 84 doesn't attempt to address people that are in default that actually are going through foreclosure by their own, financial hardships. People that should be going through foreclosure and losing their home because they didn't pay, that this initiative will not affect that. What this initiative will affect is that the bank will be processing the foreclosure properly, the lender, that all documents will be in order, that there won't be any more cloudy paperwork going through our process, and that people won't be foreclosed upon wrongfully or fraudulently. So it doesn't change whether or not a person, a person that's in default will still be in default and still have their home foreclosed upon if that's the outcome. This is creating a due process and a property rights mechanism to protect that process and keep it clean.
Well, and I guess I would ask you to take up the other side of what Don just said. I mean, they're saying, with the wording the way it is, it stops them. It stops bankers the ability to go out and sell to the secondary markets these mortgages. Is there a way that you guys can have this bigger conversation and perhaps move an initiative that makes sense, collaboratively that makes sense? Because I would understand Don's position as the banking side of things, saying, well, we can't even sell a mortgage, and which basically halts the mortgage industry
and the construction industry.
I mean, we would certainly like to challenge that. I mean, making an assumption that that's what's going to happen, and we don't really agree with that. I'm actually not equipped to talk about,
it's not an assumption, it is absolute fact.
How is it that it was happening prior to 2006 then? We just want to take it back to 2006. So if we take our law back to 2006, then the banks were operating functionally before that.
But you didn't require recording.
Yes, so it was recording.
No, we'd be glad to go back to 2006, but the fact is
that's what we were asking for with 1156.
Does not go back to 2006. It sticks this requirement of recording in there, and it also requires, for the first time that I am aware of, that we actually must file, as a matter of public record, the evidence of debt. Right now, that is not filed. That basically means that your loan number, social security number, date of birth, driver's license number is now a matter of public record. You talk about one-stop shopping for an ID thief. I mean, it's not thought through. There are probably things that we could agree to do on this, but I don't think that this proposal is well considered. I mean, Corrine has acknowledged that it was drafted hastily, and I think it shows that.
I haven't acknowledged that it was drafted hastily. The lawyers had it drafted along with the legislation. And we actually did meet with you while we were drafting the legislation, and at no time did you say that you would be agreeable to any part of 1156.
That's true, because we didn't think that it made any sense. I mean, just because you want something doesn't mean it's right. That legislative committee and legislators in the Democrat-controlled Senate reached the same conclusions. These proposals don't make sense.
Corinne, can you
it never saw the Senate.
Can you tell us where Initiative 84 is in the process of getting on the ballot now?
We are in the process of gathering the signatures to validate it. They are due on August 6th. We need 87,000 signatures. So we have a grassroots coalition working all across the state to support this. We are working on, fundraising, the coalition building, all of the things that go into building out a campaign.
And how do people learn more about what you're doing at the coalition?
It's on our website at progressivecoalition.org. We are working to have Facebook pages and all of those things. We just started up on this campaign 3 weeks ago, so it's very much in process.
And Don, what do listeners do to learn more about the work that you're doing at the Colorado Bankers Association and the positions that you're taking on this conversation?
I think I've stated the arguments fairly well today, but other than the fact that the 98% of the people who pay their mortgages on time are going to bear the costs of all this red tape that this would put us through, which is not insubstantial. But we've not yet launched websites or done anything like that. We will in time, but the issues are fairly clear, I think, and I do believe that we could probably reach an agreement on some things anyway if we could sit down, but they came in with kind of an all or nothing approach on legislation and then on this constitutional amendment, and I do think it is poorly thought through and that it has a number of problems. You know, I don't particularly like the banks being blamed for shutting down lending in the state, which then puts construction workers out of work and home builders out of work and all those sorts of things.
Well, this is certainly a hot topic, and there are certainly a lot of conversations that will go through around this conversation. Corrine, thank you for being with us. Don, thank you for being with us. And as always, Steve, you bring such interesting conversations to the Driving Force Radio Show.
Thanks for your flattery, Jan.
Oh, no, thank you. And thank you for making us all aware of this conversation at a much broader level and for bringing such great guests who really rounded out this conversation. And if you want to learn more, you can go to either the Colorado Bankers Association or the Colorado Progressive Coalition. Learn more, understand more. And as always, tune in every Saturday to Driving Force Radio, where we're seeking to discover what's driving today's leaders. And as always, that's what we've done today. Thank you and have a great weekend.